Thanks for joining us for this episode of Undressing Bourbon. I'm Diane Strong with Bourbon on the Banks Festival, and I'm here in Lexington, Kentucky with Jared Bickel and Bespoken Spirits. Let's go check it out. Jared?
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here for Undressing Bourbon. This season, we're bringing it home, meaning that we're really getting to know the people in the industry, not just what they represent. So I appreciate you being here. And just in this little bit of time, some of the stuff you're telling me about Bespoken, I have to assume you've got a chemistry background. Is that how you got to Bespoken then?
Actually not. I have a master's in broadcasting, which is kind of funny that we're doing this interview. I've set up this staging plenty of times in my career, but my background really is in wine. I'm a level 3 sommelier by trade, so I've been in the wine industry predominantly for almost 20 years. I transitioned obviously because I fell in love with my wife here in Kentucky, and I didn't want to live anywhere else. I love this city, specifically Lexington, but I love the state. I'm from Cincinnati originally, so it seems like I'm very similar, but they're total opposites when it comes to living, population, things like that. And I fell in love with the whiskey industry, and I kind of transitioned, got my executive bourbon stewardship while working at James Pepper Distillery, and I fell in love with it ever since. And so I had the opportunity to join this amazing team here at Bespoken, and I haven't turned back. And so chemistry is involved heavily with what I do, but I don't have a background in chemistry. I've kind of just learned as I go on. And it's been great. I've got a great team. Jordan Spitzer, who's our head of taste, has really kind of helped me out with those logistics and things like that. And Diana, who's our wood expert, does a great job with helping me out on the chemistry and background on this. So what we do is very chemistry heavy, but no background, believe it or not.
Yeah, but it's amazing what you can learn when you have a passion for it.
Exactly.
And most of us went to school for something else anyway, right?
So. We're all lost boys. I always relate our industry as a bunch of lost boys with different backgrounds, but yet we're this big family of nomads.
That's the great thing about this industry is everybody's here for the same reason, kind of. So, were you a bourbon drinker before
I was.
This? Okay,
so,
not just wine.
I scratched that itch early on as a drinker when I grew up Catholic, so it's not surprising that I enjoy spirits. But I highly started really enjoying rye specifically. That's what really kind of, in the cocktail industry with being a sommelier, people would want a cocktail before their wine dinners, things like that. So I really dove into cocktail making, especially pre-prohibition cocktails, things like Manhattans and Old Fashions. I fell in love with Four Roses. That was my favorite whiskey. Still one of my favorite whiskeys to drink. But on the rye side, talking to people from New Riff, talking to people from Angel's Envy, talking to people from James Pepper, where I really got my start. And it just kind of triggered this beautiful relationship and this romantic relationship because it's Americana in the bottle. This is especially rye. This American as you can be. Rye isn't as big in other countries. So I kind of fell deep. I'm a historian by trade a little bit, and the rest is history. I still enjoy a nice glass of wine, and I still love a nice beer on a hot day at a baseball game. But at the end of the day, I will still pick rye whiskey as my favorite thing to drink.
Very nice. So you talk about your Catholic background. Is drinking whiskey something that
it's
your
family
introduced?
It's ceremonial, right? I specifically remember sitting around the table on Easter Sunday and everyone had a glass of red wine. And it wasn't so to, be inebriated. It was this family of this, like the bottle is living. That wine that day is going to taste differently than that wine the next day. And, maybe whiskey doesn't have that same kind of lineage, but when you feel like a barrel, we were just talking about how a barrel is breathing. That barrel, if you open that barrel today, is going to taste differently than that barrel tomorrow because the temperature might change. And so there's this family aspect, and, Catholicism is, bringing everyone together to celebrate. I don't say I'm a living and breathing Catholic these days, but what I did take away from that is that, opening that bottle, whether it be whiskey or wine, really just brings everyone together, and it's a ceremonial feel. So, yeah.
So did your family drink a lot of whiskey, or were they mostly wine?
I would say mostly wine, and that's probably my background started there. But, we were so close to Kentucky to begin with, so we had the capability of being able to taste this, especially when I became of age to drink, scratching that itch, and then the complexity of, having the same water source and the same wood access, but yet how's it tasting differently in Northern Kentucky at, New Riff compared to out in Lawrenceburg. And so that intrigued me, and how terroir dictated certain corn. Where's the corn being sourced from? Just like wine, right? And that's why that bridge was such an easy bridge to walk through, because terroir dictates all these flavors in wine too. Mm-hmm. If you look at that latitude, you can kind of say, why is sparkling wine being made in Champagne? And then you can ask very similar terroir in Northern California, and sparkling wine there. And it's just, it's so funny that, farmers are so associated with this. And I grew up on a farm. So that relationship of, how farmers are such an integral part of our business in whiskey, but also in winemaking, it goes back to this feeling of there's so many hands that were involved in this bottle. Mm-hmm. Not just the master distiller. There's a farmer that was involved. And then, wood that's being sourced in the Ozarks in Missouri. It's amazing how a bottle at $49.99 can be dissected granularly about who was involved in each part of that process. And it's romantic to me, to be honest with you.
Of course.
Yeah.
Do you remember your first experience with whiskey?
I do. It was a bad one.
You're not the first to say that.
It was Jim Beam, white label, 2-year. I remember specifically because I remember the bottle. It was at my grandfather's house, and when he passed away, that was the whiskey he drank. Mm-hmm. And so I remember specifically how sad of that, like, hey, this is the one thing that you remember your grandfather from, was this, Jim Beam 2-year, which is still a great whiskey, but it was a very sad first experience. It wasn't a celebratory experience. But yeah, I definitely remember that vividly.
But also celebrating him.
Celebrating him, of course. But
I
wish we were able, because at the time I wasn't of age to drink with my grandfather. And so it would have been nice to have that first glass of whiskey with him. That's what kind of started our itch, because my dad was more of a wine drinker. My mother was more of a wine drinker. My brother, more of a wine drinker. And so my grandfather was that first initial person to kind of get me started, even though I wasn't able to drink with him. So yeah.
What was his name?
Joseph Bickel.
It's a nice name.
It's a very strong name.
That would be a good name for a bourbon or a whiskey.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to do an honor for him.
So when you think about people who had the largest influence on you in the industry,
I would say Amir Pei. He's the owner and proprietor of James Pepper. He reborn or re-gifted that product to our industry, which is great. It's a beautiful timeline. So many integral people were involved with James Pepper Distillery back in the 1930s and 40s, before it went out of business in the late 60s. He's been the most wonderful role model. He's maybe, in my opinion, what craft distillers should strive to be. He's a Kentucky colonel. He's given so much rich history and background to the city specifically, and my ode to him by far. But I've met plenty of people, the Mattingleys that run Bourbon 30 in Frankfurt are great people, Kentucky Eagle in general, where I used to work in the distribution company, Kentucky Eagle. I learned a lot about the business side of it more than just the fun part of it, which is enjoying the spirit and learning how to make it. So I've taken away little bits of, Barry Downing, who's the master blender at Limestone Farms now, the Tim Couch whiskey. I learned a lot from Barry and how to blend whiskey, especially in rye. And but Amir Pei, I have to give credit where credit's due. Really kind of taught me a lot about the history.
Sure.
We want to repeat history, but in a good way.
Yeah.
With whiskey. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this industry right now, everybody, you kind of have to have a unique story or a unique process to stand out. Yep. And I think obviously that is something you guys are doing. It's different. And you want to tell me a little bit about what that is? Yeah,
so bespoken is almost a fabric term, meaning to customize or create. So we're a bespoking flavor. And what we're doing is a proprietary way of making whiskey, which is we contract source from a larger distillery, like an MGP or a Sonoma. And what we do is we take micro staves and we cut them through Evoke staves, which come out long length, just like this, and we do quality control. And basically what we're doing is making sure that it is up to our standards. Once that passes our QC spot, then we laser cut them in half. And we do that with a Boss laser, and then we put that into our ovens where we char it in-house. So we don't use a cooperage company like a Kelvin Cooperage or an independent wood stave company. We do that in-house, and we char on both sides of that wood stave. And what that creates is more surface area to have contact with the distillate, which then accelerates maturation, but in a healthy way by not overcooking it. So what we do once we char on both sides, we laser cut them at a smaller surface area, and we steep them into distillate. It's called an activator. So it's almost an augmented water system that controls the water temperature while it's moving, like a sous vide. And basically what we do is we steep that distillate and age it at a rapid way, accelerated maturation, which is a trigger word in our industry. Some people, will put their nose to it. It's a technology that has worked, and it is now distributors are coming to us because this process has not only worked, but it's tasting great too. So 3 to 6 months is usually our timeline to replicate this maturation. That usually tastes between 4 to 6 years. So instead of having to worry about oxidation or evaporation or angel share, we get 99% of our yield, which then brings our COGS down. So then we can have a bottle on the shelves around $49.99, $50, which is great for our pocket, but also it gives you a chance to taste craft distillate without overspending, which in my opinion is tough in our industry. A lot of craft distillate, which is not their fault, is $80 to $100. Sometimes people won't take that chance and they'll just buy something that's regularly available between $20 to $30. So I personally call it baby bear porridge, where it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's right in the middle. Mm-hmm. I think our industry and our bottles land in that area, which is great. But at no point, we know we're disruptive. We know that we're against the grain, no pun intended. But what we are is something that is, as we evolve and as wood population keeps decreasing and prices start rising, our proprietary activators will become a bigger pillar in this industry of using less wood, less energy, and less water, so we can then get those prices down and we can stop decimating the oak population. That's our goal, right? Sustainability is a hard word to access, but temperatures are rising in our industry. Mm-hmm. So that means the blight that's killing the white oak population is doing it at an accelerated rate. And so those prices are going to keep rising, just like everything else in inflation. Prices are going to keep rising because they're harder to get. So we believe our process is going to be something that's going to stand the test of time as something that is just a different way to make whiskey. Might not be the traditional way, but at the end of the day, we're still using water, wood, and grain. We're just doing it in a different style.
Sure. Well, I think you're not alone in thinking that we need to think outside of the box when it comes to doing this environmentally correctly. And even the most serious people are thinking, should we be able to use these barrels twice, maybe? Yeah. There's got to be a better way.
There's got to be a better way. We're sending it all to Scotland, right? Scotland's taking advantage of our bourbon barrels. Right. And I love Scotch, so I love that they're using it. I love the rum, these barrel-aged rums.
They're getting recycled.
But at the same time, to us, it's just like, man, there's a loss of profit here that we're just not, we're accepting that we're losing 30% evaporation. We're just accepting that loss. And that's a tough acceptance. There's conversations about, hey, we're really trying to make ends meet. How can we well, this might be a way to make ends meet. We don't know yet, but we're not the only ones having this discussion because like you just said, thinking outside the box is the only way to stick out in a saturated market because the whiskey industry is getting there. And so how can you separate it? How can you price helps. So getting your price a little bit lower than normal obviously helps, but I think flavor, these new wood finishes, whether it's Amburana wood, whether it's, maple barrel, honey barrel, people are already starting to do this. So, ride that wave as much as you can. But I think our process alone is a wave that no one else can ride, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, and as an industry that is growing again, we need to latch on to the younger generations.
Right.
And if there's anything we know about them is they are conscious.
Yes.
And so this will appeal to them, and we need to remember that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
Not that we don't love the old tradition, but it is understandable. And moving forward, we have to make some
Like decisions. I said, I will still be drinking Four Roses probably sometimes this weekend. I will still be drinking James Pepper Rye more than you know. What I love about our industry, and I was talking earlier with, is that high tide races all ship in our industry. I have yet to hear anyone badmouth another distillery for what they're doing, and because at the end of the day, we're ping-ponging people back and forth, and we're raising the ship, and it's been great. So I always suggest go to these places that are traditional, go to these places that are different, because
learn about it.
Learn about it, because at the end of the day, we're not curing cancer. I wish we were curing cancer, but what we really are doing is just enjoying a beautiful spirit in a glass. and it's not as complex as people sometimes make it to be. And I say this as I'm a wine person, and I make everything very complex when I taste wine. But I love the fact that whiskey, the simplicity is so beautiful and so rich. There's room for everyone in this industry.
So at the end of the day,
Yes.
do you have a special place in the house that you go, or on the patio?
What a great question.
Like-
you know, it's not so much a place as the people around me. I know that's such a cheeseball way of answering this, but I love, at the end of the day, talking to somebody about what they're tasting, how, you know, why are they tasting certain things. So if I had to pick a place in my house, I do have a beautiful back porch. I have a rocking chair. My grandfather bestowed upon me, so I get to use that rocking
Very
chair
nice.
now. That was one of the things I got gifted when he unfortunately passed away. So rocking chair, good music, you know, put Tyler Childers on and just rock and talk with friends. And if the campfire's on, that's even better. But if the campfire's on, it's still just being around my wife or my fathers. I have 2 father-in-laws and my father. Anytime they're around, you know, they love hearing and talking about, you know, what's new, what's the whiskey I need to start drinking, Jared, things like that. But honestly, it's more about the people I'm around, like ourselves. Like drinking this right now is fun for me.
And if there's one thing that whiskey does, it brings us together.
It does. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. Jared Bickel,
Yes.
thank you once again for joining us
course.
for this episode of Undressing Bourbon. How about we do a cheers to your Grandpa Joseph?
I love that.
All right.
Cheers.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of Undressing Bourbon. From the team at Undressing Bourbon and Bourbon on the Banks Festival, cheers.